For number 1, we have to factorize and solve 2x squared plus 13x plus 15 is equal to 0. So we first would have to multiply the coefficient of x squared with our number term, which is 15. So 2 times 15 gives us 30. That means we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 30, and those same two numbers should add to give us 13. So we are now going to look at the factors of 30. We've got 1 and 30, we've got 2 and 15, we've got 3 and 10, and we've got 5 and 6. The numbers that also add up to give us 13 are 3 and 10. So we are going to use 3 times 10 to give us 30 and 3 plus 10 to give us 13. We can now factorize this by putting 2x as the first term of our bracket, and in the second bracket we will also put 2x. However, when we multiply these, we need to get 2x squared. These are giving us 4x squared, which means we would have to divide one of these brackets by 2. So in the first bracket, we will put the first factor that we got, which is 3, and in the second bracket, we will put the second factor we got, which is 10. We now need to look at which bracket has the numbers in which both of them can be divided by 2. And the bracket which has the terms which can both be divided by 2 is the second bracket, because 10 can be divided by 2 and so can 2. So we are now going to rewrite this and keep our first bracket as 2x plus 3, and our second bracket we are going to write 2x plus 10 and divide each of these terms by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1 and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So we can now rewrite these brackets, and the first bracket will remain 2x plus 3 and the second bracket would be x plus 5. So this is our factorized form of the equation, and if we now want to solve it, we would have to equate each bracket to 0. So we would put 2x plus 3 is equal to 0, and for the second bracket we would put x plus 5 is equal to 0. To solve the first bracket, we would first have to minus 3 on both sides, so that would give us 2x is equal to minus 3. And then we would have to divide both sides by 2, which would give us x is equal to minus 3 over 2. For the second one, we know that if x plus 5 is equal to 0, that would mean x would have to be minus 5. And these are our two solutions for this equation. For number 2, we would first have to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 3, with our number term, which is 6. So 3 times 6 gives us 18. And that means we are looking for two numbers which multiply to give us 18. Those same two numbers should then add to give us 11. So we now need to look for the factors of 18. So we've got 1 and 18, we've got 2 and 9, and we've got 3 and 6. The ones that add up to give us 11 are 2 and 9. So we are going to use 9 times 2 to give us 18 and 9 plus 2 to give us 11. We can then put it in a factorized form by first putting 3x as our first term of both the brackets. If we multiply 3x and 3x, that would give us 9x squared, but our equation has only 3x squared, which means we have to divide one of these brackets by 3. So we are now going to put in the factors we got, and the first factor was plus 9, and the second factor was plus 2. We can now see that it is the first bracket in which both the numbers are divisible by 3, so we are going to rewrite this first bracket and divide both the terms by 3. The second bracket will remain 3x plus 2. So 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 9 divided by 3 gives us 3. So we can rewrite the first bracket as x plus 3, and the second bracket would be 3x plus 2. This is now in its factorized form, and if we want to further go on and solve it, we would have to equate both brackets to 0. So if x plus 3 is equal to 0, that means x would have to be minus 3. And for the second bracket, if 3x plus 2 is equal to 0, we would first have to minus 2 on both sides, so we would have 3x is equal to minus 2, which means x would be equal to minus 2 over 3. And these are the solutions for number 2. So here for number 1, we have to factorise and solve 2x squared minus x minus 3 is equal to 0. So first we're going to have to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 2, with minus 3, and that gives us minus 6. So this means we are finding two numbers that multiply to give us minus 6, and the same two numbers should add to give us a negative 1, because minus x means minus 1x. So the same two numbers should add to give us minus 1. So if we look at the factors of 6, we have 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. Because we are multiplying to get a negative number and also adding to get a negative number, that means the bigger factor would have to be negative. So if we do 1 plus negative 6, that gives us negative 5, so we're not going to use that. But if we do 2 plus negative 3, that gives us negative 1. So the two factors that we will be using are 2 and negative 3 to multiply to give us minus 6 and add to give us negative 1. We can then put them in the brackets by starting with 2x, because our coefficient of x squared is 2. So we could put 2x and the first factor, which is 2, and then put 2x and the second factor, which is minus 3. But one of these brackets will have to be divided by 2. The bracket in which both the numbers can be divided by 2 is the first bracket, so we can rewrite this as 2x plus 2 with both terms divided by 2, and then the second bracket 2x minus 3 as it is. So this cancels out, dividing by 2 gives 1, and that also gives 1, which means our first bracket is now going to be x plus 1, and the second bracket remains 2x minus 3. So we have now factorized our equation, but if we want to go on and solve it, we can solve it as x is equal to minus 1. And for the second bracket, if 2x minus 3 is equal to 0, we can plus 3 on both sides to get 2x is equal to 3. And then we can divide both sides by 2 to get x is equal to 3 over 2. So these are our two solutions for this equation. For number 2, we are factorising and solving 4x squared plus 19x minus 30 is equal to 0. So we are first going to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 4, with the number term, which is minus 30, and that gives us minus 120. So we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us minus 120. And those same two numbers will need to add to give us 19. So if we look at the factors of 120, we have 1 and 120, 2 and 60, 3 and 40, 4 and 30, 5 and 24, 6 and 20, 7 is not a factor, but we can do 8 and 15, 9 is also not a factor, but we can use 10 and 12. Because we are multiplying to get a negative number, but adding to get a positive number, that means the smaller factors are going to be negative. We can now check which one adds to give us 19. So if we do minus 10 plus 12, that gives us 2. Minus 8 plus 15, that would give us 7. Minus 6 plus 20 would give us 14. And minus 5 plus 24 gives us 19, which is the number we are looking for. So the two factors we will use to give us minus 120 will be 24 and minus 5, because they also add to give us 19. So we can now write this as 4x, because the coefficient of our x squared is 4, and our first factor, which is 24. And in the second bracket, we can again put 4x and the second factor, which is minus 5. We are then going to divide one of these brackets by 4, and the bracket in which both terms can be divided by 4 is this first bracket. So we can divide both 4 and 24 by 4. So we can rewrite this as 4x plus 24, both terms divided by 4, and in the second bracket that would remain the same. So 4 divided by 4 is 1, so we would have x, and 24 divided by 4 is 6, so we would have x plus 6 as our first bracket, and the second bracket would be 4x minus 5 is equal to 0. This is our factorized form of the equation, and if we want to solve it, we now have to equate each bracket to 0. So if x plus 6 is equal to 0, that means x would have to be minus 6. And if 4x minus 5 is equal to 0, we would first have to add 5 onto both sides, so that makes it 4x is equal to 5. And then we divide both sides by 4 to give us x is equal to 5 over 4. And these are the two solutions for this equation. So for number 1, we have to factorize and solve 3x squared minus 8x plus 4 is equal to 0. So we are first going to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 3, with 4, which gives us 12. So we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 12, and those same two numbers should add to give us minus 8. So we have to look for the factors of 12. We've got 1 and 12, we've got 2 and 6, and we've got 3 and 4. But because we are adding to get a negative number and multiplying to get a positive number, that means both the factors either have to be positive or negative. Because we are adding to get a negative number, that means both factors would have to be negative. So if we add all these numbers, we can see what gives us negative 8. Negative 1 and negative 12 add to give us negative 13. Negative 2 and negative 6 add to give us negative 8. And negative 3 and negative 4 add to give us negative 7. So the two factors that we'll be using is negative 2 and negative 6, which multiply to give us 12 and also add to give us negative 8. So we are going to write the first term in our bracket as 3x for both the brackets. And we are going to put each factor in each bracket. For the first bracket, we could put the minus 2, and for the second bracket, we could put the minus 6. We then have to divide both the terms in one of these brackets by 3. And the bracket in which both the terms are divisible by 3 is the second bracket. So we are going to keep the first bracket 3x minus 2 as it is. And for the second bracket, we are going to divide each term by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. So our factorized form will be 3x minus 2 in the first bracket and x minus 2 in the second bracket. If we then want to solve this equation, we are going to equate each bracket to 0. So if 3x minus 2 is equal to 0, we would have to plus 2 on each side, which would make 3x equal to 2. And divide by 3 to get x is equal to 2 over 3. For the second bracket, we would know that if x minus 2 is equal to 0, that means x would have to be equal to 2. And these are the two solutions for number 1. For number 2, we have 5a squared minus 13a plus 6 is equal to 0, which means we first have to multiply the coefficient of a squared, which is 5, with the coefficient of our number term 6. 5 times 6 gives us 30, which means we are looking for two numbers to give us 30, and the same two numbers need to add to give us minus 13. So because we are adding these factors to get a negative number, but multiplying to get a positive number, that means we are going to look at the negative factors of 30. So we are going to have negative 1 and negative 30, minus 2 and minus 15, negative 3 and negative 10, negative 5 and negative 6. Now if we add all of these factors to see which one gives us negative 13, the first one gives us minus 31, so it's not that. The second one gives us negative 17, so it's not that. But the third one does give us minus 13, so we are going to be using minus 3 times minus 10 to give us 30, and minus 3 plus minus 10 to give us negative 13. So we can now write this in a bracket form by putting 5a as our first term, minus 3, which is our first factor, so that will be our first bracket. For the second bracket, we could put 5a and our second factor, which is minus 10. We are then going to check if one of these factors can be divided by 5, and we can see that in the second bracket, both of these terms can be divided by 5. So we are going to write the first bracket as 5a minus 3, and in the second bracket, we are going to put 5a minus 10, but divide both of these terms by 5. So 5 cancels 5, and 10 divided by 5 gives us 2. So we can now write this in a factorized form as 5a minus 3 and a minus 2. So this is our factorized form. And now if we want to go ahead and solve this, we can equate both brackets to 0. So we would have 5a minus 3 is equal to 0. And if we add 3 on both sides, that would be 5a is equal to 3. If we divide both sides by 5, we have a is equal to 3 over 5. For the second bracket, if a is equal to minus 2, that means a must be equal to 2. And these are our two solutions for number 2. So for number 1, we have to factorize and solve 4x squared plus 4x minus 15 is equal to 0. So we are first going to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 4, with the number term, which is minus 15. So 4 times minus 15 gives us minus 60, which means we are looking for two factors to give us minus 60. Those same two numbers should add to give us 4. So we now need to look for the factors of minus 60. And to do that, we can first look at the factors of just 60. So we've got 1 and 60, 2 and 30, 3 and 20, 4 and 15, 5 and 12, 6 and 10. Because we are multiplying to get a negative product, but adding to get a positive number, that means the smaller factors would have to be negative. So if you put a negative sign by all the smaller numbers, the two that would add to give us a positive 4 is minus 6 and 10. So we can write our two factors as minus 6 and 10. So we can now factorize this equation by putting 4x in the bracket as our first term, and our first factor, which is minus 6. And in the second bracket, we can put 4x and the second factor, which is 10. Now, if we were to multiply 4x by 4x, that would give us 16x squared. But in our equation, we've got 4x, which means we are going to have to divide one of the brackets by 4. However, if we look at the two terms in the brackets, none of these are divisible by 4, which means we would have to break up 4 into its factors, which would be 2 and 2. So this means we would have to divide one of these brackets by 2 and the other one also by 2. So we are going to rewrite this as 4x minus 6 and 4x plus 10. And we're going to divide each of these brackets by 2 separately. So for the first bracket, we're going to use the first 2. And for the second bracket, we're going to use the second 2. So for the first bracket, if we divide each term by 2, we are going to have 2x minus 3. And for the second bracket, if we divide each term by 2, we are going to have 2x plus 5. We have now factorized this equation, and if we want to solve it, we now have to equate both of these brackets to 0 separately. So for the first one, we know that 2x minus 3 is equal to 0, which means 2x has to be 3. And if we divide both these sides by 2, we will get x is equal to 3 over 2. For the second bracket, we have 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. So if we minus 5 on both sides, we would have 2x is equal to minus 5. And then if we divide both sides by 2, we will have x is equal to minus 5 over 2. And these are our two solutions for number 1. For number 2, we first have to multiply 12 and 1, which gives us 12. And that means we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 12. And the same two numbers should add to give us 7. So the factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, and 3 and 4. The two factors that add to give us 7 are 3 and 4, so we are going to use 3 times 4 to give us 12, and 3 plus 4 to give us 7. We are then going to write 12y as the first term of each bracket. We would have to divide one of these brackets by 12. So in the first bracket, we could put plus 3. And in the second bracket, we could put plus 4. We can now see that in none of these brackets do we have both terms that can be divided by 12. So we now have to break 12 up into its factors. So we cannot use 1 and 12. 12 cannot divide both the terms in any bracket. If we look at the second factor pair, we've got 2 and 6. So the 2 is divisible in the second bracket because 12 can be divided by 2 and 4 can also be divided by 2. But that would mean we would have to divide the first bracket by 6, and that is not possible because although 12 is divisible by 6, the 3 is not divisible by 6. We would therefore have to use the third factor pair. As we can see, the first bracket has 12y plus 3, and both 12 and 3 can be divided by 3. In the second bracket, we have 12y plus 4, and both 12 and 4 can be divided by 4. So this factor pair would work for both brackets. So we are going to write 12 as 3 times 4, which means the first bracket, 12y plus 3, would have to be divided by 3, and the second bracket, which is 12y plus 4, would have to be divided by the 4. So if we divide each term by 3 in the first bracket and each term in the second bracket divided by 4, we would get 12 divided by 3, which is 4, and 3 divided by 3, which is 1. 12 divided by 4 is 3, and 4 divided by 4 is 1. So we would write the first bracket as 4y plus 1, and the second bracket as 3y plus 1. We would then separately equate both these brackets to 0, which means the first solution for this would be y is equal to minus 1 over 4. And for the second bracket, the solution would be y is equal to minus 1 over 3. And these are the solutions for number 2. So here are a few practice questions, so you can feel free to pause the video and have a go if you like. So for number 1, we have to factorize 2x squared plus 7x plus 3x. So first we multiply 2 and 3, which gives us 6. And that means we're looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 6. And the same two numbers should add to give us 7. So looking at the factors of 6, we've got 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. And 1 and 6 also add to give us 7. So we are going to use 1 and 6 as our factors. We are then going to put the first term of each bracket as 2x. And for the second term of each bracket, we put the factors. So for the first one, we could put plus 1. And for the second one, we could put plus 6. We then have to divide one of the brackets by 2. And the bracket in which both the terms are divisible by 2 is the second bracket. So 2 and 6 in this bracket are both divisible by 2. So we keep the first bracket as 2x plus 1. But for the second bracket, we divide each number by 2. So 2x divided by 2 is x, and 6 divided by 2 is 3. And because the question is asking us just to factorize, we leave this as our final answer. For number 2, we have to factorize 3x squared minus 10x plus 3 is equal to 0. So first we have to multiply 3 and 3, which means we are looking for two numbers that give us 9 when multiplied, and those same two numbers should add to give us negative 10. So looking at the factors of 9, we've got 1 and 9 and 3 and 3, but because these are multiplying to give a positive and adding to give a negative, we are going to look at the negative factors of 9. So if we add these to see which one gives us negative 10, the first one gives us negative 10 and the second one gives us negative 9. So we are going to use negative 1 and negative 9. So for the first term, we are going to put 3x in the first bracket and the first factor, which is negative 1. And for the second bracket, we are also going to put 3x. And for this one, we are going to put negative 9. And we have to divide one of these brackets by 3. The bracket in which both the terms are divisible by 3 is the second bracket because both 3 and 9 can be divided by 3. So we are going to keep the first bracket as 3x minus 1. And for the second bracket, we are going to divide 3x divided by 3, which gives us just x. And 9 divided by 3 gives us 3. So we will put minus 3. And this question also just asks us to factorize it. So this would be our final answer. For number 3, we have to solve 6y squared plus 17y plus 12 is equal to 0. So we are first going to multiply 6 and 12, which gives us 72, which means we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give us 72, and those same two numbers should add to give us 17. So looking at the factors of 72, we've got 1 and 72, 2 and 36, 3 and 24, 4 and 18, 6 and 12, and 8 and 9. And if we look at which one adds to give us 17, it is 8 and 9. So we are going to use 8 and 9 as our two factors. We are then going to write 6y as the first term in both brackets, And for the first bracket, the second term can be plus 8, and the second term in the second bracket could be plus 9, and we have to divide this by 6. However, we can see that none of these factors are divisible by 6. 8 cannot be divided by 6, and 9 can also not be divided by 6, which means we now have to break up 6 into its factors, 2 and 3. As we can see, both the terms in the first bracket can be divided by 2, and both the terms in the second bracket can be divided by 3. So we are going to write 6y plus 8 and divide both these numbers by 2. And for the second bracket, 6y plus 9, we are going to divide both these numbers by 3. So we have used the 2 from here to divide the first bracket and the 3 from here to divide the second bracket. So 6y divided by 2 is 3y, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. 6y divided by 3 is 2y, and 9 divided by 3 is 3. This question asks us to solve it, and in order to solve this equation, we would equate each bracket to 0. So if 3y plus 4 is equal to 0, we would first minus 4 on both sides, which means 3y would be equal to minus 4. And then dividing both sides by 3, we would get y is equal to minus 4 over 3. If we equate the second bracket to 0, we would have 2y plus 3 is equal to 0. And if we minus 3 on both sides, we would have 2y is equal to minus 3. And if we now divide both sides by 2, that means y would be equal to minus 3 over 2. And these are our two solutions for this equation.